We have breaking news now regarding the Bowe Bergdahl case. A military judge has ruled on a sentence for Bowe Bergdahl.
That's right. Just seconds ago, Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Nance, the judge in the case, ruled that Bergdahl will not get any prison time, but he will be dishonorably discharged.
He'll also be reduced in rank to E1 in his military rank and forfeit $1,000 a month for 10 months. We have had somebody in the courtroom this whole time during the sentencing phase. That's our Katie Terhune. She joins us on the phone right now. Katie, tell us what happened in that courtroom and how Bowe Bergdahl responded to this.
Well, you said it. The biggest news to come out of the sentencing, no prison time for Bowe Bergdahl. The prosecution had asked for him to go to prison for 14 years, but the judge went with the defense's recommendation, no prison time at all. He will be reduced to E1, which is a private, the lowest rank of private. He will be dishonorably discharged from the Army, and he will forfeit $10,000 a month for 10 months. Bergdahl, you could see him visibly shaking as the sentence came down. Immediately after the judge adjourned court, he was rushed out of the courtroom with his lawyers. He remains in the courthouse, and we're right outside the courthouse right now waiting for him to come out. We haven't seen him yet, but he was pretty overcome with emotion for what may have been the first time that I've seen him seem so emotional during the hearing. He's usually pretty stoic, but he was noticeably moved today.
And Katie, has there been any reaction yet from either side, the defense or the prosecution, in terms of the sentence?
No. As you know, this came down just a few minutes ago, so it's a little early to have heard from either side. The defense, I guess, conceivably got what they wanted, so they may make a statement later. I have not heard whether there will be a press conference or anything from Bergdahl's lawyers.
Katie, let's go back a couple of days here. You've been there at Fort Bragg covering this for us. Let's talk about what the prosecution wanted here in this case. What did they want in terms of the sentencing for Bowe Bergdahl?
Well, the most important part is they did want him to go to prison. They wanted a prison sentence of 14 years of confinement in a military prison. In addition to that, they wanted him discharged from the Army.
And then the defense said that it would be very troubling to send him to prison with his PTSD and some other issues that he's dealing with. Tell us what the defense's argument was to the judge not to send him to prison.
The defense's argument mostly centered around that he suffered enough. Bergdahl was a captive of the Taliban for 5 years. He was tortured. Their argument was essentially that he's already been punished, and adding military prison on top of everything he's already suffered isn't necessary. So that's the main reason that they asked the judge for no confinement in this case.
And Bowe himself testified, not sworn testimony in this case, but he was on the stand for a couple of hours, and he apologized. I'm not asking you to read the judge's mind, but his testimony did seem to be pretty powerful. Can you describe a little bit of what he said on the stand?
He was pretty emotional on the stand. He recounted his time in captivity, talked about what he went through at the hands of the Taliban. But before any of that, the very beginning of his statement was an apology to the members of his platoon who had to search for him and for everyone whom he put in danger. He said specifically to the judge that when he walked away from OP meth, he was hoping to help those in his platoon, and knowing that he did not, he said, broke his heart.
Now, Katie, is there any indication yet what happens, like, immediately? I mean, is this the dishonorable discharge immediate? Is he basically shown off the base? What becomes of him after today?
The specifics of how that process works, I'm not sure of right now. That's something I can try to touch base with the lawyers here and get a little bit better understanding. But essentially, as far as his legal status, he's free to go. He can walk off the base and go resume, if not a normal life. There's no limitations on where he can go and what he can do now.
Katie, I think we should revisit the other soldiers who were harmed in the search for him. I know a lot of people watching right now may be asking, what about them? What about those people who suffered trying to find him after he left that post? Fill us in on the testimony from the wife and some other people who testified in the courtroom about what happened to those in the military who were searching for him.
There were 3 service members who were pretty severely injured during search missions for Bergdahl specifically. The most serious injured among those was Master Sergeant Mark Allen, who was shot in the head and is left confined to a wheelchair, isn't able to speak. They said he was minimally conscious, so he may not remember things from day to day. That testimony was pretty heart-wrenching. All those people talked about, Master Sergeant Allen himself didn't speak. His wife was on the stand. But they talked about these injuries and how they've changed their life and how that would not have happened if not for Bergdahl. Those were all, witnesses for the prosecution. So part of the prosecution's total package of trying to convince the judge that Bergdahl should get 14 years or at least spend time in prison.
One of the things that came out too was when experts and those who had debriefed him and counseled him after his release, talking about how important of a resource he has been to the military. Is there any indication that that role could even be continued? And I know it's early, Katie, you're just getting this information, but that seemed like a key piece of testimony in this hearing.
Can that be continued after you've been dishonorably discharged?
Right.
I guess that's the question.
I am not sure what limits that places on it. I know some of the people who testified called him a gold mine of information, and they were certainly very, very eager to continue conversations with him and continue molding what's known as the SEER school, so the survival, evasion, resistance, and escape that they teach to troops, molding some of that off of what Bergdahl went through and what he had to say. So as far as what his hurdles are through, I guess, the military justice system on whether he'll be allowed to do that, I don't know that at this point in time, but I know certainly the people involved with those organizations are eager to hear more from him and would gladly take him. One, Mr. Russell, who testified, was saying how he wished he could have had Bergdahl 3 years ago and could talk to him.
Well, as the only U.S. service member captured and freed, that's in 16 years, the course of the war in Afghanistan, he's the only one. So he is a treasure trove of information for them. But there are two sides to this. A lot of people shocked. We're getting some Facebook responses from people saying unbelievable, disgusting. I'm sure there's a lot of people who feel the other way as well. You can weigh in on Facebook right now and tell us what you think. Katie, I think it's just a really divided issue for so many people. Many people feel one way, a lot of people feel the other. When you were in the courtroom, I know there's other reporters and people there, were there any family members in there affected by this, or anybody who gasped or responded in any way to the sentence?
No, there was not. There was not a wide reaction in the courtroom, but I will say that military court has rules of decorum. You're not supposed to, applaud a sentence that you like or gasp or, I'm sorry, there's a helicopter going overhead if you can still hear me. The rules of decorum dictate that you have to be pretty reserved as a spectator in the courtroom. So I know people, I think, have been told in advance, certainly you can show some emotion, but, don't cheer or anything like that. Or
Katie, you mentioned that Bowe was visibly shaking before the sentence was handed down. Did he have any immediate reaction when he heard the fact that he wouldn't have to go to prison?
It seemed like he was a little overcome with emotion. He's a pretty stoic guy and has been fairly stoic through this entire proceeding, all the testimony. But today, you could see him shaking. You could see him kind of clenching his jaw and moving back and forth a little bit. I think it was just a very emotional moment for him.
Well, Katie, we appreciate you being in the courtroom throughout this week, keeping us posted on what's happening in that courtroom. You've heard so much testimony. I know a lot of people pointed to the fact that the brutal treatment that he received from the Taliban was so tough on him, how he was beaten, burned, starved. He was locked in a cage for years. That resulted in permanent physical issues, mental scars. The judge was asked to consider that, obviously, and not putting him back into that kind of environment where they fear he would suffer severe PTSD. When the judge handed down the sentence, did he explain any of that, or was it just, here's the sentence, let's go?
It was very short and to the point. He said, here's what I'm going to do. No explanation of why. Not whether he was doing it for a certain reason or something the defense said resonated with him more than something else. He said, here's your sentence. That's it, and closed court. It was a very brief, from the time the judge took his seat to the time the sentence was passed down, was a very brief moment and not a lot of explanation.
Well, Katie, thank you for your explanation of all of this and your reporting throughout the last couple of weeks on this case. We know you have more reporting to do as you try to get some reaction from the prosecution or the defense on this. So we're going to let you do that right now, and we can kind of recap now exactly what happened today. The big breaking news coming down 8.5 years after Bowe Bergdahl was first taken captive by the Taliban after walking off his base in Afghanistan. He pleaded guilty to desertion and misbehavior before the enemy, and today the judge handed down the sentence of no prison time for Bowe Bergdahl, but there's also the dishonorable discharge portion of the sentence as well.
That's right, no prison time, but Bergdahl will be dishonorably discharged, reduced in rank to E1, and he'll forfeit $1,000 a month for 10 months.
Now the dishonorable discharge also means that he will not be eligible for any VA health care or other benefits, and we understand that this will also make it quite difficult for him to find future employment as well.
Well, our Katie Strahuna is going to chase some other information there for us throughout the day. We have a show coming up at noon as well, but we will certainly break in if we get any more information for you that's important about Bergdahl.
Thanks for watching, and we will be, as Maggie said, more today on the news at noon, and watch for it on KTVB.com as well, as the judge rules no prison time for Bowe Bergdahl.